I don't know if anyone's heard of Mile High on this stream, but that's a topic for another day. I could talk about Mile High.
Yeah.
There's one-
To summarize it real quick, it's a collector and a shop that basically used to and still does have some of the highest graded. It's
way more interesting than that. It's way more
Yeah.
interesting than that. So the owners of the former owner of the Mile High collection were the children of Edgar Church, who was this kind of graphic artist, and he was, I wouldn't call him a recluse, but he had some very strange traits. Let's just say that. And Chuck Rosansky, who owns Mile High Comics, discovered this collection purely by luck, because the person the Edgar Church got sick and they had to put him in a home, and so they wanted to sell the family home, and the comics were in the way. And when we say in the way, we're looking at, there's about 30,000 Golden Age comics stacked up in the basement, like 3 feet deep across the whole basement, and then into a closet. And the closet was floor to ceiling. And when they called Chuck, he was the second person they called. That's why I say it was luck. And there's lots of things, unkind things said about Chuck and around the Mile High collection, but people don't realize how different comic book collecting and dealing was back in the day. This is 1976, I think. And so these books weren't, as they are now, 80 something years old. At the time they were 20, 25 years old.
Yeah.
So they called him because the first dealer they called said, "We don't do house calls." So it's like the guy that said, I'm not signing the Beatles. You guys have got no future. Like that's the same, like whoever it is, or was probably, must have kicked himself backwards and forwards across his house for weeks and years, because Chuck Rosansky said, "Oh, sure, I'll come and have a look." And he went in and he said, he asked for a glass of water because his mouth went so dry that he couldn't speak. And then he was trying to drink the water, but he kept spilling it down his front because his hand was shaking so much. And so he was looking at all these Golden Age comics stacked across the floor of the basement. And he said, "Wow, there's a lot here." And he said, "No, that's not everything." And they opened this door, and then there's this closet, floor to ceiling, and all the older stuff was in there. And so they didn't let him touch it. So he's kind of just like going through it, and he could see all the early number ones and everything were all stacked up face down from like the lowest number to the highest number. So that it was stacked like it was perfect storm. It was in a dry basement in a perfect climate, which is Colorado. Kept out of the light, so there was no dust shadows or sun shadows. And then in the closet, the ones in the closet were in better shape than the ones obviously on the floor. Anyway, all that to say, he couldn't fit them all in his van, so he negotiated a price for them, and he said, "You should let me sell these on consignment. You'll do way better." And they said, "No, we just want them out of here." So he couldn't fit them all in his van, so they made him come back the following week. Because I said, "Oh, it's not convenient for you to come back tomorrow." No, we'll see you next Saturday. So he got half the collection out of the house on day one, but not the stuff in the really good stuff that was in the cupboard. And he didn't sleep for the whole week because he was thinking, what if they sell it? What if they dump it somewhere? Because he'd seen they dumped all their father's artwork in a skip outside the house, because there was a lot of animosity between the kids and the dad. Because of the way he was when they were growing up, he wouldn't let them anywhere near the comics. Like, imagine you're a kid. "Oh, I want to read those." No, you're not. Touch them. It was one of those situations. Quite often, the pedigree collections, the ones with the really high grade stuff, were owned by strange people, because it's a strange thing to do when you think about it.
Yeah.
There's another very famous pedigree called the Twin Cities pedigree.
Okay.
That's a Silver Age pedigree. And I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. So the guy was a bus driver, and he'd spend his wages on comics, and he would go through them on the rack looking for the best ones, take them home, and then store them in a room. And no one knew about this until he died. They called the superintendent called the fire department because there was smoke coming out of his apartment. He suffocated on the smoke and died. And there was like a fire in the kitchen or something. But the comics weren't touched. They were in a separate room. And no one knew about it. So when they opened the door, there's this perfect collection of Silver Age comics. And again, it's those kind of people that are just so strange. They just like put
Yeah.
them away and they never touch them, and they're really particular about choosing exactly best copy. Anyway, so Edgar Church,
Wow.
now high copies of everything. Like some of them are missing. The strange thing is that it was one of the greatest collections ever discovered, and he didn't know what to do with them. You didn't have eBay. You didn't have an easy way to sell 30,000
Yeah.
high grade golden age comics. They weren't even better than average. Like, you know, some collections you get them and you go, oh, this is nice. This Silver Age collection, they're all at 7 or 8s. That's really unusual. No, these were like 9.2, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8 shape. And the average golden age book at a convention was like a VG. So he'd go to conventions with his stock, and the dealers would just swarm around him, and they'd spend all the money they had on his stuff. And then the rest of the convention would be really weird because everyone would be sitting around going, I don't even know why we're here. No one's going to want our stuff. They only want that. It just changed the game. The hobby was there were 3 grades in the Overstreet price guide, and he said we need more grades because these books changed the game so much. They just broke the grading structure that they had at the time. So he had to sell a significant portion of the collection just to pay for ads in Marvel comic books, because he thought, well, if I advertise these for sale in Marvel comic books, I'll sell them mail order. And I think the number they wanted was $21,000, which in 1976 was an enormous sum of money. So he sold a lot of the big keys to a dealer or a collector who had that money. And there are tons of stories. I mean, we could fill a whole podcast with this. There are tons of stories about that pedigree, but no, he doesn't own any of them anymore. Chuck Rosansky. I'll finish this story by saying that Chuck Rosansky subsequently had to take his bookkeeper to court because she'd been embezzling money from the company. Milehigh Comics. She was also the accountant, so she was accountant and bookkeeper. So anytime you have an accountant who's also your bookkeeper, you have to be careful because they get to like tally things up and make.
There's no checks and balances. It's church, separation of church and state.
Edgar Church and state. So it turns out that she'd been sort of siphoning money out of the company for years, and he was almost bankrupt, and all he had left were the Mile High copies of Action 1 to 10, which he intended to keep forever. And he turned down an offer in 1986 or something of $1 million for the Action 1. And he had to sell them in a hurry to keep the business afloat. I think he got 80,000 or something for the whole thing. Sorry, I got that bit of the story wrong. The next owner would turn down an offer of $1 million for the Action 1.
Wow. Okay.
That makes sense. Yes. So he no longer owns them. In fact, I remember there being a little bit of a press release when he sold the very last book, which was Red Rider Comics #1, I think. And that was the last of the Edgar Church books he still owned.
Wow.
I got really obsessed about pedigree collections. There are some amazing stories, but let's do a podcast just about pedigree collections.
Seriously, that's fascinating.
It's so much fun.
You lit up when you said it, like, it's a lot better story than you think, and I was like, I'm in. I mean, I literally am like hypnotized right now with that story, and it's also like really sad too, because I mean, like you said, to come up like it's almost like the lottery winners, you know, that have that bad like curse and the bad luck when they win the lottery and they're so excited, and then like just all these bad things happen to them, to come upon this treasure trove and to have, like, you know, I just can't even imagine it. I would be so excited, over the moon, but I'd also want to do it with people that also enjoy it, right? Like you know, what's the fun in it if you can't like enjoy the fact that you just came on this windfall, and then to have, you know, the bookkeeper kind of like, you know, do what she did, and then
it's sad. If you read, like, he wrote a blog for years, and I read every single blog post, and that's how I know so much about this. If you read, he's the one. He talks about it very differently to the people who observed all this happening and who talk about him. When he talks about it, he's full of gratitude. I think he's a very grateful person in general. He's quite inspirational to me. I find his attitude to life very good. And he said, I built Mile High Comics into what it is because of the Mile High collection. And you know, without that, I wouldn't have the company I have. And I'm very grateful for what it's turned into. And he has a thriving business. He still does.